Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. Welcome to The Urban Farmer, week 25. It's August 25th, 2015. Which means we're at the tail end of summer and shorter, cooler days are coming as fall nears. And with that change of season, it inevitably means that changes are coming to the farm. We're at one of those unique periods in the year known as the shoulder season, the transition period at the end of one season and the beginning of another. These can be tricky time periods for farmers to navigate. Day lengths start getting shorter, temperatures start getting cooler, and the weather patterns start to change. As a farmer, this is one of those time periods where it's critical to be able to observe and adapt. Because you literally have a limited amount of daylight and warm temperature to work with. So you need to be able to observe and understand the changes that are taking place in your biome and plan your crop rotations accordingly.
So the key is you want to utilize the time where it's warm. Like, it's still warm here. The nights are cooling down a bit, but not much. It's not hot at night, but at this point, like, things will germinate fast and they'll grow to 75% of their maturity relatively quickly. And then as the days shorten and the temperatures drop, they'll slow down. And so that last 25% of the stretch that crop takes to mature will happen over a longer period than it would normally.
As a new farmer, this will be tough. In your first few seasons, you'll still be feeling things out and doing a bit of experimenting. But make sure that experimenting is not for naught. Keep good records and then review the records each year to see how well your timing worked. Do you need to adjust it or not?
If you record all, keep records of all your planting dates, is you'll settle on what is the best last planting date for certain crops. So, for example, for me, August 18th is the last date I can plant salad turnips in order for them to be mature before it gets too cold.
As a farmer, you have to know these dates for your biome. Good record keeping and actually reviewing those records each year will start to show trends, and it'll make the following years easier to deal with as you adjust your last planting dates accordingly. But what about the new farmer? What if you don't have previous records to fall back on? The only way that you can get those records in the beginning is by experimenting, seeing what works and what doesn't.
I'm always experimenting, but I'm doing those in a far more controlled and small situation. Now it's like these three crops I know I can do. They've worked year after year after year. When other things have failed, they're the ones that have succeeded. So that's kind of I go with that.
That's a key point. Did you catch that?
Now it's like these three crops I know I can do. They've worked year after year after year. When other things have failed, they're the ones that have succeeded. So that's kind of I go with that.
Go with what works. Allocate some time and space to experimentation, but be careful experimenting when you need production. Remember, as a farmer, you need to try and put the odds in your favor as much as possible, and that means going with what you know works. And what works for you might be different than what works for Curtis. With an ever-changing climate, each situation is different and each climate is different, making these shoulder seasons tough to explain and tough to figure out. This episode should shine some light on the topic and give you a general approach of how you can deal with these seasons. It's this approach and methodology that lies at the core of every farmer's ability to adapt. We're currently 25 weeks into the farm season. Let's see how Curtis is holding up and if he's burnt out yet.
Well, in a way, I am burnt out because I just finished writing my book, which has been really how I've spent most of my time this summer. as far as burning out on the farm, the key is to just not overwork yourself. That's why it's so important to have systems in place to do things effectively and efficiently and fast. And that you're not just always grinding out. Like I remember, 3 or 4 years ago, even on a Friday, we would be prepping for market until like 9 o'clock. And that's really the kind of thing that caused burnout. The one of the number one ways we avoid burnout on the farm is by staging our harvesting. And I'm sure we've talked about this on previous episodes, but it's in the summertime, like basically from mid-June until going about mid-September, we harvest something every single day of the week, like Monday through Friday. On Friday, we're mostly packing, but it's Monday through Thursday, we're harvesting all the time. So that there's never really a big harvest day, and that really spreads it out. And the thing that also does, that was sort of an after effect that I've seen the effect of, but it wasn't really part of the plan. What that does is when you have multiple days to harvest, and this is why you need to have like proper cold storage, like you need to have walk-in coolers. But what this does is that it gives you enough leeway in order to harvest things at the perfect time. And that really saves you a lot of time on the farm because, say, for example, if the weather's perfect, I'm going to harvest my greens on a Thursday, which is usually, like if we're prepping for Friday deliveries or a Saturday market, we usually harvest our greens on Thursday. But if it's going to rain on Thursday, and then we go out and work out in the rain, harvest the greens then, that adds a considerable amount of time. I would say 25 to 50% it adds to the time, because it means that, when it's raining and you work in the rain, you're moving slower because your boots are getting stuck in the mud, you're changing clothes. It's kind of miserable, so you just don't feel as like, you don't feel that inspired to work. But then processing all the vegetables, especially greens, once they've been rained on, adds a lot of considerable time. So the main thing is, by having a lot of time to harvest allows me to look at the weather and be like, oh, you know what? It's going to rain Thursday. Let's harvest the greens on Wednesday. So we've done that the whole season this year, and that's really been a big part of avoiding late season burnout.
How do you manage an employee when it gets hot? Do you structure their hours? Do you just say, this is what's got to get it done, on your own schedule? Here's the hours we're allowed to access the plots. How do you keep them from burning out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's something that I monitor carefully, because I'm very concerned about their well-being. It's kind of a thing where it's like, I'd rather risk my health than have them risk their health. So it's starting early and shutting it down when it starts to get hot. My main guy, though, actually, he has a far better heat tolerance than I do. And so when we're dealing with the really hot weather, which we're past now, but when we had 2 months of very extreme heat, it was a lot of the time me saying, dude, we can shut it down. Don't worry about it. And he'll be like, no, I'm totally fine. I'm into it. And so, but that's usually what it is. It's like starting at 6, taking a break at 11 or 10:30, and then, working for a few hours after that. Sometimes on extremely hot days, we'll just work straight for 6 hours. Small breaks here and there, drinking water and eating a few bites of food, obviously, but just work straight for 6 hours and then try to finish most of the day then. And then if something needs to get done, we'll do it after dinner, like when it starts to cool down. But we didn't really have to do that this year, but that's kind of how I've done it in the past.
With the heat itself, are you pushing things like harvesting to the very beginning and the very end of the day, call it like the bookends of the day? Is there a time when you're just not harvesting past?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it depends on the veg. Like, you can get away. If you have to harvest root vegetables and it's really hot, you can get away with it. But greens, yeah, absolutely not. Like in the summer, I'm not going to harvest greens past 11 o'clock. I try to do it early morning or in the evening. Generally early morning. We haven't had to work evenings this year, which has been really nice. Like when we're done, we're done. But yeah, it's all about in the morning, early, first thing. And if the greens are a little bit wet from, say, the irrigation the night before, it's not too bad, especially when it's really hot, because it almost just kind of makes them a little bit more crisp in the cooler. In the spring, it's not nice having your greens wet, mainly because you'll see the slugs will kind of like move up from the soil. They'll move into the greens when they're wet, and then they'll move out at the end of the day. So in the springtime, I actually want to harvest my greens in the middle of the day or when it's warmest. Because that way they're less wet and there's less pests in them. But in the summer, no, a little bit of water on there isn't a big deal, and definitely early morning is the best time to do it.
What about in terms of transplanting and direct seeding? When it gets really hot, do you back off on one of those types of strategies, given either lower take rates on the transplants or lower germination rates when you're direct seeding?
Like, we have to keep doing those things. So as far as transplanting goes, because, this year we were transplanting all season. We were transplanting lettuce every few weeks, kind of have a 3-week planting plan that I follow. And yeah, sometimes it just took us a while that we'd be doing it in the afternoon. Ideally, you want to just do it early morning though, and then make sure they're really good and watered in by the time afternoon comes around. That's what we strive for. Direct seeding, it doesn't matter. I can direct seed any time of the day because those things happen fast. It's the bed prep that we want to do early because that requires a decent amount of physical labor, especially because we're doing everything no-till now. So when we're turning over a series of beds, we're either hand pulling the previous crop or we're stirrup hoeing it out to get that crop residue out. And that's the majority of the difficult work, running the tilther and all that kind of stuff, or even forking the beds a little loose. That's light labor. The heavy labor is the bending over to pull the crop out. And so those are the kind of things that we'll try to do early in the morning or when it's cool. And then direct seeding is nothing. I mean, with my Jang seeder, it takes me a minute or two to seed a 50-foot bed. So that can be done whenever. And so, yeah, it's kind of like looking at all the tasks that you have to do and kind of prioritizing them by what's the best time to do this that will cause the least amount of harm to us as workers.
And along the idea of mitigating harm to workers, I know in a previous episode you mentioned that you'll take naps, and some people have asked about that. Like, how does he have time to take naps? So you just kind of talk about like the idea of scheduling time to take a nap actually makes you more productive.
Oh man, naps are so crucial. I'm such a napper. When I'm working in the heat, I'm not as hungry. I kind of like I'll eat a decent amount in the morning, and for lunch. So like the guy who works for me, he lives just blocks from me, and so he'll go home for lunch, and so I'll just come in, I'll eat something pretty quickly, and then I'll just take a nap for 20 minutes or half an hour is really all I need. If I sleep more than that, then I get too tired going into the afternoon. So that's usually what it is. I just eat pretty quickly, and then I just lay down on the couch and just shut my eyes for a little while. It really helps.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think you're even starting to see bigger companies start to do that and encourage that. And I know for a lot of people, again, it's anti-intuitive. They think, well, how can you take the time to take a nap in the middle of the day when you have so much to do? But I see a lot of people by this time of year, they look like they're running on fumes.
Well, some of the most successful people do that. I know just from going through the process of writing a book over the last 18 months, naps have been critical for me. Because my mind, like I'll start editing or writing or whatever it was at 6 a.m. and by noon or 1 o'clock, my mind is just fried. So taking a nap is pretty good to just kind of recharge your batteries.
And it's one thing that just doesn't get talked about a lot within this space, this whole idea of looking out for your personal well-being versus always pedal to the metal. I've noticed it working a different style of job, but just you'll get to days where you don't feel productive, you can't do a lot, and sometimes it's best just to get what you have to do done as fast as you can, and then don't be afraid to take some time off, quit early, and just relax for a little bit and come back the next day refreshed versus trying to power through it and just end up digging the hole a little deeper for yourself.
Yeah, totally. My whole thing is when I have to do things especially on the farm, actually in general, but when I have to do things that I don't like doing, I just do them fast. Just get it done. Just crank it out. Especially like working in the crazy heat we had this summer. That was kind of the thing, was just get out there fast. And so when we were at the busiest in the summer, there was 3 of us working, and I was still working on the book. So I was only working on the farm maybe a couple hours a day, but I would get the guys going in the morning, like early, start at 6, and just kind of set a pace and just crank, like just go fast and just get things done, because you're fighting the sun coming higher in the sky. It's getting hotter. The temperature's climbing like a degree every 10 minutes. Like it just gets so hot so quickly. So you don't have time to screw around. Like time is of the essence. So yeah, for me, it's just like go, 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 get it done. And then, you know what? If we finish early, fine. It's usually if there's something that had to be done in the evening, it would be me. I don't really like to send workers home and then say come back in the evening. Usually it'd be me doing that.
And one other part of the whole transition here at the end of the year, as we move from these hotter days into the cooler days of fall, is preparing for fall crops and overwintering crops. Where are you in that whole process right now in terms of what do you have in the ground? What do you still have to put in the ground?
Yeah, that's happening now big time. So one thing that people should do, and it'll be different for everybody, and everybody's in their own different bioregion or wherever they are in the world, is you'll find, especially after a season of farming, if you keep records of all your planting dates, is you'll settle on what is the best last planting date for certain crops. So, for example, for me, August 18th is the last date I can plant salad turnips in order for them to be mature before it gets too cold. And I've arrived at that date because in previous years I might have planted, say, that the week after August 25th, and by October or like early October, they just weren't quite mature enough. And at that point, it's getting so cold that they're not going to get that much more mature. So the key is you want to utilize the time where it's warm. Like it's still warm here. The nights are cooling down a bit, but not much. It's not hot at night, but at this point, like things will germinate fast and they'll grow to 75% of their maturity relatively quickly. And then as the days shorten and the temperatures drop, they'll slow down. And so that last 25% of the stretch that crop takes to mature will happen over a longer period than it would normally. And so it's at this point, it's all about slowing down your successions and starting to plant out larger areas of crops. So up until this week, I have been planting things like radishes and turnips and arugula every single week. So for example, from the, mid-May until about a week ago, I'm planting 2 or 4 beds of each of those things every single week because that's what I know I can sell each week. But now, so I get to these last planting dates. So August 20, today actually was my last radish planting date. So now it's like I just plant out a ton. So I'll say, okay, these radishes in the summer are 21 to 28 days to maturity. Now it's probably going to be about 40 days to maturity, maybe 35. So that means that they're not going to be ready until about the first week of October. But that's okay because you can, at this point, when it gets that cool, you can have a bunch of stuff that's all mature at once because when it gets cool, it's just going to sit there. I mean, obviously different for people in Southern California like where you are. But for up here, things just don't grow the same way. When you're doing them in a greenhouse, that's another thing. So, I mean, I can push it a little bit more with radishes if I put them in a greenhouse. But for my last field date, I'm going to go August 25th and I'm going to plant out I think we did about 8 beds because I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go through 2 beds a week. When these are ready, I want to have 2 beds a week up until the second week of November. And so that's the strategy there. So, same thing with carrots. It's like my last carrot planting date is between the 1st and 5th of August because I know that's enough time to have those carrots mature before it gets cold. And then at that point, I just need to have a bunch mature so that I'm just harvesting what I need from there because I'm not getting the same consistent growth once I get into October.
So are all these crops that you're talking about here, where they're maturing by mid-October, is that all stuff that will be cropped out prior to winter this year, or will any of that be staying in the ground over winter?
Oh yeah, we're pushing a lot into winter. So spinach, kale, and carrots are my main overwinter crop, though I always try lettuce because there are years that it's worked. So I'm trying it again this year, but I'm not putting it in my greenhouse. So the way I look at my farm, because my farm is so small, is I kind of evaluate the real estate. So my most prime real estate on my farm is in my greenhouses. And so if I'm going to put something in my greenhouses, I want it to be a sure bet. Because, in the past, I've made the mistake of trying to do lettuce in my greenhouses, and then we get this crazy cold snap in mid-November, wipes out my lettuce, and my spinach and kale survive just fine. But it wipes out the lettuce, and that means that now I've got half of my greenhouses don't have anything in them, and at this point, I can't really direct seed anything and expect it to grow. So that's the really important thing when you're going into, winters that most people in the U.S. and Canada experience, that you have to be really strategic. So, right now we've got a bunch of kale transplants that go out. What I did this year is I pushed the kale further. Normally my transplanting date for my fall kale is August 1st, and that's when I'm planting little ones. So what we did this year is we potted them up to buy more time, because we're trying some new strategies with interplanting this year, and so I needed to buy a little bit more time to prune up these tomatoes to free up more space in the greenhouse. So we potted them up into 2.5 pots, and then that way, they're nice and big now. They're, in a greenhouse, they'll be ready for first harvest in about 2.5 weeks once we transplant these. So these are going in tomorrow, and then now I start to get into direct seeding spinach in the field again. So I don't plant any spinach after June, but now I start to put it in the ground in September. And then I'm starting to do larger plantings. So, I'll have my first planting of spinach will be in the field August 31st. And then by about late September, those will get covered up with polytunnels. And then that will be a fall crop. That will be ready by early October. And then I'll have another planting that'll be a week after. And so the interesting thing that happens is once you pass the summer solstice, the days get exponentially longer. And I find in my region, there's sort of a halfway point where the days become visibly exponentially shorter. So right after the summer solstice, it seems like there's a period of time where the days just seem long. But then around this time, about the end of August, you start to really notice each day is getting shorter and shorter. And that's as we approach the fall equinox. And so, at this point, it's the opposite in the spring. So at this point, you can plant a crop, say, August 31st, and then plant another crop the next week. They won't be just a week apart in maturity. They might be 3 weeks to a month apart in maturity, because those days get so much shorter, and especially once you get into the colds. Whereas, in the springtime, the opposite occurs. You could plant in April, you could plant a crop, say, April 1st, and then plant the same crop April 8th, and they'll both be mature at the same time. And that's because the days are from the second week are that much longer and are catching up to the first week. So it's interesting. It's sort of a dynamic that is hard to get your head around at first, but the key to understanding it is to tracking all your plantings. And so really recording, and I learned all this from trial and error. I read it in some books, but it was hard to understand. I hope I've done a better job in my book trying to articulate this so that people can understand it better. But I had to kind of figure it out, and it took me years to figure this out. But I did it by recording things, by going, okay, looking back at my spreadsheets from a previous year and going, you know what, that planting of spinach that I did there wasn't mature in time for Thanksgiving, and that sucks because the Thanksgiving farmers market is a huge one. They want to have tons of product for that one. So it's like, okay, maybe if I planted a week earlier, then it'll be mature. And then so, just through trial and error over time, you figure these things out.
Based on hearing that, I would assume that day length has more of an effect on crop growth than temperature does as you go from summer into fall. So if you had a warmer fall, would that change anything versus a cooler fall, or is it really the day length that is the biggest factor?
Well, it's both, Diego. It's not really one or the other. It's definitely both. Heat units and light are both pretty important. I would say actually the heat units might be more important. I mean, because here's the thing. There's no variability as far as from one season to the next as day length. This time of year is the same day length as it was last year and the year before, 100 years before, as far as I know. But the temperature does change considerably. So there have been some falls that are shockingly cold or they're surprisingly warm. And so I've definitely seen that fluctuation. Like last year, actually 2 years ago, we were planning to run a winter CSA. We had about 30 or 40 members signed up, and we were running it as a separate program. It was like a separate CSA. And I had all my greenhouses planted, like I had tons of stuff for winter production. And we had this crazy cold snap in mid-November where we were like considerably below freezing. It was about minus 15 Celsius. I think that's around 0 Fahrenheit, maybe. Very cold. And it killed all my lettuce. Like my spinach and kale survived, but and it also killed my radishes. So, you know, we had to cancel our CSA program for them. We had to refund all of our customers. So, you know, you can get some wild cards, but I'm finding over the years the best thing to do is to go with what you know. And in my climate, I know that I can do spinach, kale, and carrots, and they can survive severe cold snaps by preparing and having those crops fully mature long before that cold snap occurs, and then having all the systems in place as far as season extension infrastructure to make sure that I'm prepared for those.
That's where I was going with that. This whole idea of day length is obviously that doesn't change, and temperature variability does. And as long as you're tracking results year over year, you can look at, if you plant something every year at August 20th, you can see when it matured. You can start to get a feel for the average temperature variation over those total number of years to give you some idea.
There's definitely some reliability in that, but you know, the climate is changing. The only constant is change. So I just accept this now, and I just, you know, I hope for the best and I prepare for the worst. So, but I'm definitely done with trying to experiment on a large scale, at least, with some things. I'm always experimenting, but I'm doing those in a far more controlled and small situation. Now it's like these 3 crops I know I can do. They've worked year after year after year. When other things have failed, they're the ones that have succeeded. So that's kind of like I go with that. And then, you know, we're scaling up our microgreens production pretty huge this year. So we're building a pretty high tech passive solar greenhouse. So we're going to be able to do a lot of stuff as far as the indoor production goes, microgreens and whatnot, this winter. So that's kind of our diversity plan there. Have some field crops and greenhouse crops, and then really push the microgreens and stuff like that.
In terms of transplants, when is pretty much the last date you're starting anything you're transplanting for the fall? Mid-July?
Yeah. The only winter transplant thing I do now is kale. My last lettuce planting went in the ground mid-July. You know, and those are just getting matured now, which is perfect because they'll be cut 4 times basically. So that'll get us, if those mature by, say, I think they'll be mature by next Friday. They'll be cut over a 1.5 month period, perhaps even more. And then that'll push us pretty well into the fall. And then, you know, we're going to have greenhouse greens and stuff back. Like, you know, we'll also have some more arugula that goes in the greenhouses, some more red Russian kale and some of the Asian greens again. So we'll have stuff to make a salad mix, but the lettuce will peter out as we get further into the fall. And it really is just a reflection of what happens. It's almost a mirror image of what happens in the early season. Like the first things that I'm harvesting from my farm, say by late March, mid to late March, is my overwintered spinach. That's the first thing I get, and I have a lot of that, and overwintered kale. And then I get my first greenhouse seedings that were stuff that was direct seeded in even late February, early March. Those come online about the second week of April, and that's sort of the Asian greens. And then I don't have lettuce until the end of April or, mid-April at the earliest. So what happens here is almost a reflection of what happened then, is that lettuce will finish up by maybe the end of October. If we get a warm November, we can push it till the end of November. I pushed it till Christmas before. But then I'll have all those Asian greens and the kale and the spinach just like I had in the earliest part of the season at the beginning.
You stuck the farmer's market in late October. Do you continue restaurant sales then throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah, that's all we do. The winter markets, it's tough. You just kind of get burnt out on doing markets because it's like, you're up every Saturday for an entire summer for 7 months of the year. It's kind of just tough to do it. Especially in the winter when it's dark, getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to a market in the winter, and it's a drag, dark until like 7:30 or 8. And yeah, it's just not nice. So we're doing a lot more, we're doing some retail stuff for this winter, which hopefully will carry on into the main season of next year. So we're expanding without taking on more land this year. We've got one plot we talked about in an earlier episode that we've expanded that plot. We're not taking on any more new plots. We've been looking for some, but just haven't found anything super ideal. So there's ways for us to expand without actually taking on more land. And so that's kind of where we're focusing. Like, how far can we push this? I thought this year, this has definitely been our best season ever. And we were up about 35% from the previous year. And so I can see that we can grow another at least 20% the next season without taking on any more land. Yes, we'll have one more small plot where we already have a plot, which will be about 10 beds. But there's also strategies that we're doing, I read about in the book, where you can add land by combining beds. So crops that come out of the ground all at once and grow quickly, like radishes and arugula, we often plant 2 beds next to each other. You can forfeit the walkway and plant a 5-foot wide bed, basically, because you don't need that middle walkway. So that adds 20%, because if you have 2 7-row beds of radishes next to each other and you've got a 10-inch walkway, you can add 3 more rows in there, which gives you about 21% extra crop. So there's things you can do like that. And if you really intelligently manage your production, you can expand without taking on more land. And so that's definitely what we're going to be doing more of next year to increase production.
Yeah, it's always cool to hear how you're trying to constantly maximize what you have and fine-tune down to the smallest piece of land. In terms of your restaurant sales, come, say, November 1st through January 1st, how much will have those have changed volume-wise from, say, peak production in the summer? Are they half? Are they a quarter?
They're tiny. Definitely less than a quarter. Because the thing is, for us, is we're in a very seasonal area. Kelowna is a tourist town. The population, I think it quadruples in the summer, something like that. And we're already starting to see that peter out. A lot of the wineries that I sell to are very seasonal as well. And so come end of September, it really drops down. From where we are now at, say, peak production, we're starting to come down. Our sales are starting to slow down. Production's slowing down. But yeah, winter, it's a fraction. Like, on my end, winter production is it just kind of pays the bills. I mean, again, I'm hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, but this year, I imagine that winter production will just pay the wage of the guy who works for me. And that's okay. That's what I want. I've got income that comes off the farm now, so that's what I want to do. I want to keep him working because he's great, and keep a good job for him. So that's the idea there, and hopefully we can grow it. The nice thing for me now is that I'm more off the farm. I'm more focused on business development and sales, making new sales, making new connections, new customers. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be out pounding the pavement a little bit, looking to secure some new relationships with people and see where we can go with that.
Well, along those lines, with it slowing down as much as it is in the wintertime because it's a seasonal market, and the fact that you're dedicating more time to kind of office and business development, you're talking about bringing on microgreens, and that can be lucrative the way it sounds. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that you have to be able to sell the microgreens. So how are you approaching, we're going to add winter microgreens? How do you know that you can sell those given that it's such a seasonal market, or do you have to look to other places to try and move that product?
Well, I was actually out in the summer pounding the pavement. I've got two pretty large size grocery stores that are very committed to buying volume from us. Yeah, I'm taking a risk for sure by doing it, but I've done this before. Like, I'm prepared to take that risk. I've been here before. Like, so it works out great. If it doesn't, we adapt and we figure something else out. I'm putting up a huge chunk of change to build this pretty high tech passive solar greenhouse in my backyard. So I'm taking a risk there. At the same time, that greenhouse for me there's many values I can stack out of there besides just growing microgreens. I can teach workshops in there. We can use it as a place to process and post-harvesting stuff in the winter. We can, it's going to be a great nursery, and there's other revenue streams we can pull out of that potentially as well. So, I'm kind of going for it, but these are the things that you do in business, right? These are the risks. You take calculated risks based on, previous experience and vetting the market. And so I think I've done a pretty good job of vetting the market to see what's possible there. And one thing I'm pretty good at, which I wasn't as good at before, is building relationships with customers. And it's something that I enjoy doing. And so I've built some good relationships that I'm pretty sure we can leverage and make a profit this winter from.
Relationships with retail outlets like grocery stores, do those ever go into writing, or is that more of a verbal?
No, I don't go into writing. I'm not into that. What's the point, right? I mean, maybe some people do that. I'm sure big operations do that. Like when you're a 50-acre farm or even a 1,000-acre farm down in, Southern California, and you're distributing big amounts, like you're selling broccoli, 2,000 kilometers away. I'm sure they have contracts, but for small farmers, I don't know anybody that does that.
I'm even thinking from the retailer side, like, is it just part of their policy that they would want stuff in writing, or do they actually deal on verbals?
You know what? From what I've seen, it depends. The one thing that's pretty annoying actually is certified organic. Is some of the stores that will only buy certified organic produce. There's all kinds of stuff there because you got to deal with COABC, which is the Certified Organic of British Columbia, for where I am. But the ones that don't, they're okay with it. And so the nice thing for us is we've built a pretty strong brand for our farm over the years. We're going to label our packages. So we're just using our brand in the grocery stores. And I'm pretty confident that people are going to recognize that brand and support it based on that. So, well, that's my hope, at least. I mean, I could always be wrong. It could always be a big failure. You never know. But, yeah, I mean, so yeah, we can't work with the ones that want certified organic, cause I'm not interested in certified organic. It's a bit too much of a hassle on my end because most of my customer streams are just direct consumer markets. So it's a lot of paperwork and decent amount of cost to go for it. So I'm just kind of going the path of least resistance, going with the channels that will support us based on our own personal brand, and they believe that their customers will go for that too.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the whole idea before that of we're taking a risk. And from the outside, it doesn't seem like you're even taking that big of a risk. I mean, yes, you're building the greenhouse and putting the infrastructure in that, but like you said, you can multi-purpose that for other things later on. If the microgreens thing didn't work, just the cost that you have into the microgreens themselves is going to be so minimal compared to the potential upside that it's one of those shots like you do those every time.
Well, yeah, I mean, the nice thing about micros for me, like I've been doing microgreens for 6 years now. I've done them since I started farming. And I've got the systems are dialed now. I mean, they're an easy thing to get into, but they're a difficult thing to do over the winter because there's a lot of variables like air quality, air temperature, humidity. You have to manage sterilization of seed and all your planting medium and all that stuff. But I've been through it before. Like I've done pretty big microgreen production in the winter before. So it's not a systems thing that's the issue. It's the customer thing. And I've done it so much now that I know when to hold them and when to fold them. It's kind of like, I'm not going to ride it out too long. If sales aren't working, I can pull the plug and change things up pretty quickly. But I mean, that's also the beauty of microgreens is that, these are 10 to 14 day cycles from planting to harvest. So there's a pretty fast reaction time if you're seeing things change in the marketplace, and you can adapt and change things up pretty quickly. So I'm used to doing that. But again, that's a nice thing. It's a nice place when you can be somewhere in your business where you're focusing on the business opposed to focusing on just grinding out production. So in this case, I've got a guy who can manage production. I've trained him to do microgreens. There'll be a learning curve for him a bit in the winter, but not much. It won't be that big of a deal because I'll be here around for a while. We can just look at the market and what's the marketplace want and how can we best cater to that and deliver a quality product for a good price.
Really like the whole concept of that and how you're approaching it. If sales on the microgreens were slow, would you consider just doing them on a small scale, even if sales were slow, to keep yourself in the grocery store, which gives you visibility, which gives you some sort of relationship with that store?
I think so. I mean, there's always going to be a sweet spot that's kind of like forget it, or you know what, this is probably worth riding out for a bit. I'm not sure what that is. I imagine it would have to be something within, a few $100 range to make that economical. But yeah, I mean, I'm prepared to take that risk. I definitely don't want it to be costing me money to operate. And so that's the risk you run when you have employees. And it's kind of why I think, the best way, the most profitable way to run a farm my size is more for the person who wants to be the farm manager. Like that's the lowest risk. Like when you start getting into employing people, then that's a constant cost. It's not an overhead. I don't believe employees are overhead. I believe employees are investments. But you run a risky investment if for 4 months of the year you're in the red a few $100, right? So each week or whatever. So you have to be careful there. But I mean, everybody has to decide what's the sweet spot. Like, what am I willing to risk in this? And I'm probably willing to risk a little bit, but, I didn't get to where I am in farming by going broke. I got to where I am in farming by turning a profit on a very small piece of land with minimal infrastructure and low overhead. So I don't want to change that really.
And you're just doing one of the things that has came up in every single episode, it seems like, of this show. You got to try stuff and then just see how it works. So you're going into it with a new greenhouse, a full-time employee, see how it goes. You can always adapt on the fly, but if you don't take that chance, if you don't try it, you'll never know.
Totally.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.